He thought he could bury the truth beneath forged papers and false tears. He thought the entire town would stand by his side, believing his lies about my father's final wishes. But he forgot one crucial thing: my father knew men like him existed. And in that courtroom, with the judge's gavel raised high, 30 years of deception crumbled in 30 seconds. The house my father built with his own hands would never belong to a thief. Some legacies are worth fighting for. Some truths refuse to stay buried. My name is Lena Hayes, and until 6 months ago, I believed grief was the worst thing that could happen to a family. I was wrong. Sometimes the real tragedy begins after the funeral, when vultures descend upon what's left behind. I'm 34 years old, a senior software engineer at North Point Systems in Portland, but my real education came from watching my father build his life with his bare hands. Robert Hayes wasn't just my father. He was my hero, my mentor. The man who taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable and that some things were worth more than money could ever buy. Dad founded Hayes Restoration Company when I was 7. I still remember him coming home covered in sawdust and paint, his eyes bright with excitement as he described saving another piece of Portland's architectural history. He specialized in restoring historic buildings, bringing them back from the brink of demolition. Every building has a soul. Lena, he'd tell me, running his calloused hands over original woodwork. Our job is to honor it, not erase it. The crown jewel of his work was our own home, Ridgewood House. Built in 1892, it had been abandoned for decades when Dad bought it at auction. Everyone thought he was crazy, pouring his savings into a crumbling Victorian mansion. But Dad saw what others couldn't. He spent 15 years restoring every inch of that house, teaching me along the way. I learned to identify different wood grains before I learned algebra. I could spot original crown molding from across a room before I could drive. Every weekend of my childhood was spent in that house, holding flashlights while Dad worked, listening to him explain why he chose restoration over replacement. He documented everything, photographing every stage, keeping meticulous records in leather-bound journals. "This house is our family's story," he'd say, showing me his detailed drawings. "One day, it'll be yours to protect." The workshop in the basement was his sanctuary. He'd built custom cabinets for the entire first floor there, each piece a masterpiece of craftsmanship. The smell of cedar and linseed oil still takes me back to those Saturday mornings, watching him plane wood until it was smooth as silk, his movements precise and deliberate. Dad wasn't just teaching me about restoration. He was teaching me about legacy, about the things that matter, about how a man's character shows in his work, in what he leaves behind. He'd often say, "Anyone can tear down and build new, Lena. It takes love to restore what others have given up on." When the heart attack took him at 59, it felt like the world had lost its foundation. One moment he was reviewing blueprints for a new project, the next he was gone. The doctor said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but we did. Mom and I stood in that house he'd brought back to life, and for the first time, it felt hollow. At his funeral, hundreds came, former clients, other contractors, Preservation Society members, all sharing stories about how Robert Hayes had saved their buildings, their history, their memories. The mayor herself spoke about Dad's contribution to Portland's architectural heritage, but all I could think about was the unfinished rocking chair in his workshop, the one he'd been making for his future grandchildren. Mom, Marianne, took it the hardest. They'd been married 37 years, high school sweethearts who'd never spent more than a week apart. Watching her navigate those first months was like watching someone learn to walk after losing a limb. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of his absence. I tried to visit every weekend, bringing groceries, helping with maintenance Dad would have handled. The house needed constant care. That's the thing about historic homes. They're living things that require attention, knowledge, love. Dad had left detailed maintenance schedules, lists of trusted contractors, even notes about which boards creaked and why they should never be fixed, because a house should have character, should tell you where you are in the dark. If only I'd known that grief makes people vulnerable. If only I'd seen that some people view that vulnerability as opportunity. If only I'd realized that while I was focused on preserving Dad's legacy, someone else was planning to steal it. 3 months after Dad's funeral, Mom started attending a grief support group at the community center. I encouraged it. She needed to talk to people who understood that particular hollow ache. She'd come back looking a little lighter, sharing stories about others who'd lost spouses, finding comfort in shared sorrow. I was grateful she'd found that space. Then she mentioned Victor. He lost his wife 2 years ago. She told me over coffee one Sunday. Cancer. He understands what it's like when half of you is suddenly gone. Victor Sloan was 55, with silver hair and what Mom called kind eyes. He owned a small accounting firm, dressed in pressed khakis and polo shirts, spoke softly about his late wife Rebecca. When Mom first brought him to dinner, I wanted to be suspicious, but he seemed careful, respectful. He asked about Dad, looked at family photos with what appeared to be genuine interest, didn't try to fill Dad's space at the table. Your mother deserves happiness, he told me privately that first evening, standing in Dad's workshop, though I noticed he didn't touch any of the tools. I'm not trying to replace anyone, I just understand her loneliness. 6 months after Dad died, Mom called with news that knocked the wind out of me. Victor was moving into Ridgewood House. It's too big for just me, she explained, her voice defensive like she'd already had this argument with herself. And Victor's lease is up. His children need a stable home. His children, Travis, 30, between jobs and finding himself. Haley, 28, a self-proclaimed influencer who spent her days taking selfies. Both had been living with Victor in his 2-bedroom apartment. Now they'd have an entire Victorian mansion as their backdrop. I drove over immediately. Victor was already there, directing a moving truck. Lena, he called out warmly. But something in his smile had changed. It was proprietorial now. The smile of someone who'd won something. Your mother said you might have concerns. Let's talk. We sat in Dad's study, Victor behind Dad's desk, which made my skin crawl, while he explained how this was best for everyone, how Mom needed life in the house again, how his presence would maintain the property value. He used a lot of corporate speak, the language of someone who reduces everything to assets and efficiency. What about Dad's things? I asked. We'll be respectful, he assured me. Though some updating might be necessary, your father was wonderful, but his style was a bit dated. Dated, 15 years of meticulous restoration, of historically accurate fixtures, of custom millwork, dated. Travis arrived while we were talking, his truck loaded with gym equipment. Sweet setup, he said, looking around like he was surveying a hotel. That basement workshop would make a sick man cave. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That's my father's workshop. Was, Victor corrected gently. Lena, holding on to the past isn't healthy. Your mother needs to move forward. Haley appeared next, immediately complaining about the old people smell and asking if they could paint the original Victorian wallpaper in the front parlor. It would look amazing in white, she said, already framing shots with her phone. Very minimalist. I looked to Mom for support, but she was wrapped in Victor's arm, looking smaller somehow, like she was disappearing into his shadow. Change can be good, she said weakly. Over the next few weeks, the changes started small. A modern coffee maker replaced Dad's vintage percolator. The hand-carved coat rack he'd salvaged from a demolished hotel vanished, replaced by chrome hooks from IKEA. Victor's motivational posters appeared in the hallway, covering the spots where Dad's restoration awards had hung. I tried talking to Mom alone, but Victor was always there, always inserting himself into our conversations. When I mentioned the will, specifically that Dad had left the house to me, Victor's kind eyes turned sharp. Interesting interpretation, he said smoothly. Though I'm sure Robert meant for Marianne to have life estate, no man would leave his wife homeless. She's not homeless. The will provides for... We're not discussing this now, he interrupted, his accountant voice firm. This is a family matter. Family. As if he'd earned that title by charming a grieving widow, as if 6 months of support group coffee entitled him to my father's life's work. But the real violation came when I arrived one Saturday to find contractors in the driveway. Victor stood in the doorway, directing them like he'd lived there for years instead of weeks. "What's happening?" I demanded. "Modernization," he said simply. "This house has potential, but it's stuck in the past. We're bringing it into the 21st century." I pushed past Victor and found them in the living room. 2 men were dismantling the built-in cabinets, the ones Dad had spent 3 months crafting, joining each piece with dovetail joints so precise you couldn't slip a paper between them. They were yanking them from the walls like they were cheap particle board, not irreplaceable handwork. "Stop!" I shouted. "Those are original to the restoration." The contractors looked to Victor, who sighed as if I were a child having a tantrum. "They're outdated. Lena, we're putting in open shelving, much more contemporary." Those cabinets are documented in the Historical Society's archives. Dad's restoration of this house won a preservation award. Victor's smile was patient, condescending. "Your father isn't here anymore. We are, and we need this house to work for the living, not serve as a museum to the dead." I found Travis in the basement, already halfway through converting Dad's workshop into his gym. The workbench where Dad had taught me to use a plane was pushed against the wall. His tool collection, some pieces inherited from his own father, was boxed up carelessly. Antique chisels mixed with screwdrivers, everything jumbled together like junk. "Where are the journals?" I asked, panic rising. Dad had kept detailed restoration journals, documenting every decision, every technique, every piece of history he'd uncovered. Travis shrugged. "Doing bicep curls?" "Some old notebooks. Think they're in the garage. Or maybe we tossed them. Who keeps paper anymore?" Upstairs, Haley was directing painters in the parlor. The William Morris wallpaper Dad had sourced from England, spending months finding an exact historical match, was being covered with primer. She was live streaming it. "Home makeover, out with the dusty vintage, in with clean modern vibes." "That wallpaper is from 1890, I told her. "Exactly," she said, not looking up from her phone. "It's literally ancient. Victor says we're increasing property value by modernizing." I found Mom in her bedroom, sitting in Dad's reading chair, one of the few things still untouched. "How can you let this happen?" I asked. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Victor knows about these things. He says the house is worth more updated." "Dad didn't restore this house to flip it. It's our home, our history." "Stop living in the past," she snapped, then immediately looked shocked at her own words. Victor's words, coming from her mouth. "I mean, Victor says holding on to things too tightly isn't healthy." That evening, I called Dad's lawyer, Harold Benton. "The will is clear," he assured me. "The house goes to you. Your mother has the right to live there, but not to make substantial changes without your permission." "Then I want them stopped." "I'll send a formal notice," Harold said. "But Lena, this could get ugly. Victor seems to have significant influence over your mother." Ugly was an understatement. When the legal notice arrived, Victor's mask finally slipped completely. He called me, his voice cold and corporate. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Your mother is happy. Why would you ruin that?" "I'm protecting my father's legacy." "Your father is dead. This romantic attachment to old things is why you're 34 and single, living alone while your mother has found love again." The personal attack stung, but I recognized the manipulation. The will. Wills can be contested, especially when there's evidence of undue influence or when new documents surface. "What new documents?" He chuckled. "Nothing, yet, but you'd be surprised what grieving widows remember signing, what they might have agreed to. Your mother is quite suggestible right now." The threat was clear, but what really turned my stomach was walking through the house a week later. The vintage light fixtures were gone, replaced with track lighting. The clawfoot tub Dad had restored was ripped out for a modern shower. The wood floors he'd spent months refinishing were covered with gray laminate. But the worst was the den. Dad's architectural drawings. His photos documenting the restoration, his awards, all gone. In their place were Victor's diplomas, Travis's sports trophies from high school, Haley's influencer merchandise. They weren't just changing the house, they were erasing my father. I stood in what had been his sanctuary, now unrecognizable, and made a decision. Victor thought he could steal my father's legacy, thought he could manipulate my grieving mother and intimidate me into silence. He was wrong. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything, every change, every destroyed original feature. Then I called Harold back. "I want to fight this," I said, "whatever it takes." "It'll get messy," he warned. "Victor won't go quietly." Good, I thought, because neither would I. My father had taught me that some things were worth restoring, worth fighting for. His legacy was one of them. The lies started small, then spread like rot through wood. It began at the neighborhood association meeting. Victor stood up during community concerns, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity he'd perfected. "Marianne and I are so grateful Robert left us the house," he said. "We're honoring his memory by updating it, making it a home he'd be proud of." Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door for 40 years, caught me afterward. "I didn't know your father changed his will," she said, confused. "He always told me the house was going to you." "He didn't change it," I said. "Victor is lying." But Victor had already moved on to bigger audiences, at the Rotary Club, where Dad had been a member for 20 years. Victor presented himself as the grieving widow's savior, stepping in to help manage the estate Robert had entrusted to them. He donated money in Dad's name, money I suspected came from selling Dad's tools and restoration supplies, and suddenly, everyone saw him as generous, thoughtful. The story evolved each time he told it. First, Dad had wanted Marianne to have security. Then it became, "Robert discussed changes with me before he passed." By month's end, Victor was claiming Dad had specifically asked him to modernize the house for Marianne's comfort. My Aunt Susan called me, confused. "Victor told the family reunion committee that you're contesting your mother's inheritance, that you want to throw her out of her own home." "That's not true. Dad left the house to me, but Mom has lifetime residency. I'm trying to stop Victor from destroying it." "That's not what he's saying. He showed us paperwork." "What paperwork?" "Some sort of codicil. He said your father added it a week before he died." My blood went cold. Dad had been in the hospital that week, barely conscious. He couldn't have signed anything. I started getting looks at the grocery store. Former family friends avoided me. My cousin posted on Facebook about children who value property over their parents' happiness. The narrative was taking hold. I was the greedy daughter trying to steal from my poor widowed mother and her kind new husband. Then came the email that changed everything. Harold forwarded it to me, his note tense. "We need to talk immediately." The attachment was a scanned document, codicil to the last will and testament of Robert Hayes. It left Ridgewood House to Marianne with full authority to designate succession, including to her spouse should she remarry. The signature looked like Dad's, but the date, one day before his death, when he was on morphine, when I'd been holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. "It's fake," I told Harold in his office. "Dad couldn't even hold a pen that day." "Can you prove that—" "The hospital records, the nurse's notes. I was there every day. They knew me." Harold studied the document under a magnifying glass. "The signature is shaky but consistent with his style. Victor must have traced it or practiced extensively." "Or forced Mom to help," I said, the thought making me sick. "She's been so different lately. So empty, like she's given up." "We'll need a handwriting expert. This could be expensive, Lena." "I don't care about the money." But Victor did. That evening, he called from Dad's old study phone, a calculated cruelty. "I heard you're questioning the codicil," he said smoothly. "That must be painful, realizing your father changed his mind about you." "We both know that document is fake." "Do we? Your mother remembers being there when he signed it. She'll testify to that." "You're manipulating a grieving woman." I'm protecting my wife's interests, but I'm not unreasonable. Lena, drop this fight, and I'll let you have some of your father's personal effects. Push it, and you'll lose everything. Your mother will testify against you. The community already thinks you're heartless. Do you want to be completely alone? I hung up on him. The next day, Victor escalated. He sent the fake codicil to Dad's old clients, to the Historical Society, to the newspaper that had featured Dad's restoration work. The story spread: respected contractor leaves house to beloved wife. Daughter fights to overturn dying father's wishes. Mom called me crying. Victor says you're trying to destroy our family, that you never accepted him. Mom, please, you know Dad wanted me to have the house. You were there when he talked about it. I don't remember. Victor says grief confuses things. Mom, that codicil is fake. Dad was dying when it was supposedly signed. There was a long pause. Then, so quietly, I almost missed it, I know. Then why? I can't, she whispered. He's always here, always watching. I'm so tired. Lena, it's easier to just agree. The line went dead. When I tried calling back, Victor answered. Marianne's resting. This stress you're causing isn't good for her health. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by photos of Dad and me in the house, building together, laughing together. In every picture, his pride was evident, not just in the house, but in teaching me, in passing on his knowledge and values. Victor thought he could erase that with lies and forged documents. He thought the town's opinion mattered more than the truth. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Harold Benton's office hadn't changed in the 20 years since Dad first brought me there. The same leather chairs, the same oak desk, the same photo of Harold and Dad at a Rotary fundraiser. But today, Harold looked older, energized in a way I hadn't seen since Dad's funeral. Lena, sit down, he said, pulling out a banker's box. Your father was smarter than any of us realized. Inside was a manila envelope labeled Estate Protection File, in Dad's precise handwriting. My hands shook as Harold spread the contents across his desk. Robert came to me 2 years ago, Harold explained. Said he wanted to ensure his wishes couldn't be challenged or misconstrued. He was healthy then, but thorough, always thorough. The first document was a detailed letter in Dad's hand, dated 2 years before his death. I, Robert Hayes, being of sound mind and body, create this record to accompany my will. Ridgewood House represents my life's work and my family's heritage. It is my express wish that my daughter, Lena Marie Hayes, inherit this property in full upon my death. She alone understands its historical significance and has the knowledge to maintain it properly. While my beloved wife Marianne shall have lifetime residency, the house must pass to Lena to preserve our family legacy. But that wasn't all. Dad had included photographs of every room, every custom feature, with detailed notes about their historical importance, construction receipts, correspondence with the Historical Society, a USB drive labeled Video Statement. There's video, I asked. Harold nodded. Pulling up the file on his laptop, Dad appeared on screen, healthy and vital, sitting in his workshop. The date stamp showed 2 years ago. If you're watching this, Dad said, his voice strong and clear, something's happened to me, and someone might be questioning my wishes, so let me be crystal clear. Ridgewood House goes to my daughter Lena, only Lena. She helped restore every inch of this place. She knows its history, its quirks, its soul. Marianne, honey, if you're watching this, the house is yours to live in as long as you want, but it belongs to our daughter. That's not negotiable. He held up the will, showing his signature, demonstrating his normal penmanship. This is how I sign my name. This is my actual signature. If anyone presents anything different, question it. I was crying by then, hearing his voice again, seeing him plan for this exact situation. There's more, Harold said gently. He pulled out a folder of correspondence. Your father documented every conversation about the house. Look at this. An email chain from 6 months before Dad died. discussing estate planning. Dad had written, "Concerned about Marianne's vulnerability if something happens to me. She's too trusting. Made sure everything is ironclad legally. Lena will protect her and the house." Then Harold showed me the crown jewel, a notarized affidavit from Dr. James Morton, Dad's physician, dated the week of his death. Robert Hayes was under heavy sedation and pain management from date until his passing. He was not capable of signing legal documents or making informed decisions about his estate during this period. "This destroys Victor's codicil," Harold said, "but there's something else you need to see." He pulled out another document, a report from a forensic document examiner Dad had somehow commissioned in advance. "Instructions for comparison against any posthumous documents claiming to be mine," read Dad's note. "Your father sent me his signature samples and told me to keep them in case anyone ever challenged his will." Harold explained. "He said, 'Harold, you never know what vultures might circle when I'm gone.' I thought he was being paranoid." "He knew," I whispered. "Not about Victor specifically, but he knew someone might try something." "There's one more thing." Harold pulled out a sealed envelope marked, "For Lena, open only if someone challenges the will." Inside was a handwritten letter from Dad. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, someone is trying to take what I've left you. Don't let them. That house isn't just property. It's our family's story, told in wood and stone. Every joint I taught you to cut. Every board we salvaged together. Every late night we spent discussing why preservation matters. That's what the house represents. I've prepared for this fight because I know you're strong enough to win it. In my workshop, under the third floorboard from the north wall, the one that creaks, you'll find copies of everything. I hid them there because I know you're the only one who truly knows that workshop. Trust Harold. Trust the truth. And remember, I chose you as my heir not just because you're my daughter, but because you understand that some things are worth preserving exactly as they are. Fight for our house, sweetheart. I'm counting on you. All my love, Dad." "We need to get to that workshop," Harold said. "Victor turned it into a gym." "Doesn't matter. If the documents are under the floorboards, they're still there." Harold's eyes gleamed. "Victor's about to learn what happens when you forge a dead man's signature, especially when that man saw you coming." That night, I called the one person I knew could help, Dad's friend Mike from the construction crew. "I need to get into the workshop without Victor knowing." "Say no more," Mike said. "The boys and I have been waiting for a chance to help. What Robert built, nobody should destroy. When do we move?" The Multnomah County Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice, its stone columns catching the morning light. I arrived early with Harold, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. Behind us, Mike and 3 of Dad's crew members carried boxes of evidence. They'd insisted on coming, saying Robert would have done the same for them. The courtroom filled quickly. Victor had ensured maximum attendance, confident in his fabricated narrative. I saw neighbors, family friends, even reporters from the local paper. Victor sat at the plaintiff's table. He'd filed to have the original will overturned, with his lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Brennan who specialized in estate disputes. Mom sat behind Victor, looking small and lost. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. Judge Patricia Chen called the court to order. "We're here regarding the estate of Robert Hayes, specifically the validity of a codicil dated 1 day before his death." Brennan stood first, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. My client's wife, Marianne Hayes, witnessed her husband sign this codicil leaving their family home to her. Their daughter, unfortunately driven by greed, refuses to accept her father's final wishes." He presented the forged codicil with theatrical reverence. Robert Hayes wanted his wife secure. He told Mr. Sloan, who had become a trusted confidant, that he worried his daughter valued the property more than her mother's welfare. I watched Victor nod solemnly, playing the concerned stepfather perfectly. The crowd murmured sympathetically. Then Harold rose. "Your Honor, we'll prove this document is a complete fabrication, and that Victor Sloan committed fraud to steal property clearly designated for my client." "That's a serious accusation, Counselor." "Yes, it is," Harold began methodically. First, the original will, filed years ago, uncontested until now. Then Dad's letter, explicitly stating his intentions. The video played on the courtroom screen. Dad's voice filling the space, strong and certain. This video could have been coerced, Brennan argued. Harold smiled. Which is why we have this. He presented Dr. B. Morton's affidavit. Robert Hayes was physically incapable of signing anything the day this codicil was allegedly created. He was on morphine, barely conscious. My client's wife says otherwise, Brennan countered. Then let's ask her, Harold said. The room tensed as Mom was called to testify. Victor's hand touched her shoulder as she passed. A reminder or a threat? I couldn't tell. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Chen asked gently, did you see your husband sign this codicil? Mom's hands trembled. She looked at Victor, then at me, then at the judge. I was there. My heart sank. Can you describe the circumstances? Harold asked on cross-examination. He was in bed. Victor brought the paper. He said Robert wanted to sign it. Was Robert conscious? A long pause. He opened his eyes. Could he speak? No. Could he hold a pen? Mom was crying now. Victor held his hand, helped him. The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen gavelled for order. Mrs. Hayes, Harold said gently, did Robert actually sign this document, or did Victor Sloan move his hand? Objection, Brennan shouted. I'll allow it, the judge ruled. Mom looked directly at Victor for the first time. Victor moved his hand. Robert didn't even know what was happening. He was dying, and Victor used him like a puppet. Victor shot to his feet. Marianne, you're confused. No. Mom's voice cracked with months of suppressed truth. You told me if I didn't agree, Lena would throw me out. You said you were protecting me, but you were just stealing from my daughter, from Robert's daughter. Judge Chen called for order again. Harold quickly introduced the forensic handwriting analysis, showing the signature was traced, not naturally written. Then came the documents from under the workshop floorboard, more letters, more proof, all in Dad's hand, all anticipating this exact scenario. The judge turned to Victor. Mr. Sloan, would you like to explain how a dying man's signature appears so precisely traced? Victor's composed mask finally cracked. I was helping my wife secure her future by forging a legal document. It's what Robert would have wanted. According to whom every piece of legitimate evidence shows he wanted the property to go to his daughter. Brennan tried to salvage things. Your Honor, even if the codicil is invalid, Mr. Sloan has invested significantly in improving the property. Harold interrupted with photos. Improvements. They destroyed historical features worth hundreds of thousands. They violated preservation guidelines. They diminished the property's value and historical significance. I watched Victor's face cycle through rage, disbelief, and finally, fear. Judge Chen's verdict was swift and devastating. The codicil is fraudulent. The original will stands. Mr. Sloan, you're hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days. Furthermore, this matter will be referred to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges. The gavel came down with finality. The courtroom buzzed with shock. The neighbors who'd believed Victor's lies sat stunned. The reporters scribbled frantically. Victor stood frozen. His careful construction of lies collapsed around him. But I only had eyes for Mom, who was sobbing with what looked like relief. The courtroom erupted like a dam bursting. Reporters rushed toward the doors, phones already at their ears. The headline would write itself, "Local businessman exposed for forging dead man's will." But Victor wasn't done fighting. "This is a mistake," he shouted, his face purple with rage. "That woman is senile. She doesn't know what she's saying." Judge Chen's gavel cracked sharply. "Mr. Sloan, you're in contempt. One more outburst and you'll be removed." Victor's lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Victor shook him off. His carefully maintained facade had completely shattered. revealing the calculating predator beneath. "You ungrateful brat," he snarled at me. "Your mother needed me. That house was falling apart." "No," Mom's voice cut through his tirade, stronger than I'd heard it in months. "The house was perfect. You're the one who destroyed it. You destroyed everything Robert built, everything he loved." The bailiff stepped forward as Victor lunged toward our table, but Mike and Dad's crew formed a wall between us. These men who'd worked alongside my father for years stood silent and immovable, their message clear. 14 days. Mr. Sloan, Judge Chen repeated coldly, "and I'm issuing a restraining order. You're not to contact Ms. Hayes or Mrs. Hayes except through legal counsel." As the bailiff escorted Victor out, he turned one last time. "This isn't over." But it was. The truth had won. Outside the courthouse, the scene was surreal. The same neighbors who'd avoided me for weeks approached with apologies. Mrs. Patterson hugged me tightly. "I should have known better. Your father would never have changed his will like that." Others weren't as gracious, slinking away without acknowledgement. But I didn't care. The truth was out. Mom stood apart from the crowd, looking fragile but free. When I approached, she collapsed into my arms. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "He kept saying he was helping, that you were trying to hurt me. He twisted everything. After a while, I couldn't tell what was real anymore." "It's okay, Mom. He's gone now." "The house? What he did to the house?" "We'll restore it," I promised. "Every single thing. Dad's crew will help. We'll bring it back." Mike overheard and nodded. "Already making calls. Everyone who worked with Robert wants in. No charge. It's what he would have done for any of us." 3 days later, I stood in Ridgewood House's doorway, watching Victor's moving truck. Travis threw things in carelessly, the same way he'd treated Dad's tools. Haley live-streamed the injustice to her followers, claiming they were being illegally evicted from their home. Victor himself said nothing, his silence more unnerving than his threats. He loaded his motivational posters and cheap furniture, removing every trace of his brief occupation. When he passed me, carrying the chrome coat hooks that had replaced Dad's salvaged rack, he paused. "Your father was a fool," he said quietly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills. That house will bankrupt you, just like it would have bankrupted your mother." "My father built a legacy," I replied. "You tried to steal it. The only fool here is the one who thought a forged signature could erase a lifetime of love and craft." His jaw tightened, but he kept walking. Within hours, they were gone. Mom and I walked through the house together, cataloging the damage, the destroyed cabinets, the painted-over wallpaper, the ripped-out fixtures. Each destruction was a wound. But in Dad's workshop, despite Travis's gym equipment, the bones remained. The workbench he'd pushed aside was scarred but solid. The walls still held the pencil marks where Dad had sketched designs directly onto the studs. "We can fix this," I said, running my hand over the familiar wood. "All of it." "All of it." Dad documented everything. I have his notes, his suppliers, his techniques. It'll take time, but we can restore it exactly as it was. Mom picked up one of Dad's hammers that Travis had tossed in a corner. "I want to help. I need to help. It's the only way I can apologize to him." That evening, Harold called with an update. "The DA is pressing charges: forgery, fraud, elder abuse. Victor's looking at serious prison time." Justice felt hollow compared to the damage done, but it was something. A week later, the truth had spread through Portland. The newspaper ran a feature about the attempted theft, including Dad's video and the forged documents. Victor's accounting firm lost clients overnight. Travis and Haley disappeared from social media after the backlash. Victor himself was arrested at his office, led out in handcuffs as his remaining clients watched. But I didn't focus on their downfall. I had work to do. Standing in Dad's workshop, surrounded by his tools and the crew that loved him, I pulled out his restoration journals, page by page. We would undo Victor's damage. Board by board, we would restore what was lost. "Where do we start?" Mike asked. I opened to Dad's notes about the living room cabinets, his precise drawings, his wood selections, his finishing techniques, all preserved in his careful hand. We start where he did, I said. With the bones of the house, we build it back right. The work would take months, maybe years, but Dad had taught me patience, precision, and the value of doing things properly. Victor thought he could erase my father with modern fixtures and white paint. He never understood that my father's legacy wasn't just in the wood and stone, it was in the knowledge he'd passed down, the community he'd built, the daughter he'd trained to protect what mattered. The house would rise again, exactly as Robert Hayes intended. 6 months later, I stood in Dad's workshop, sawdust in my hair, varnish under my fingernails, surrounded by the controlled chaos of restoration. The workbench was covered with cabinet pieces, each one carefully crafted to match Dad's original specifications. The smell of cedar and linseed oil filled the air, the smell of home being rebuilt. That's the last dovetail joint, Mike announced, fitting 2 pieces together with the satisfying whisper of wood meeting wood. Your dad would be proud. It's perfect. Through the workshop window, I could see Mom in the garden, planting the same heirloom roses Dad had loved. She'd moved back in 3 months ago, after we'd restored her bedroom and the kitchen. She looked like herself again, not the shadow Victor had created, but the strong woman who'd stood beside Dad for 37 years. The house was coming back to life, room by room. The Historical Society had gotten involved, providing grants and volunteers. Dad's story, and Victor's attempted theft, had resonated throughout Portland. People understood now that this wasn't just about property, it was about preservation, legacy, and the courage to fight for what matters. The living room cabinets were finally complete, installed exactly where Dad's had stood. The Victorian wallpaper had been restored by a specialist from Seattle who'd heard our story and offered her services at cost. The clawfoot tub was back, sourced from the same salvage yard where Dad had found the original. But the workshop remained my sanctuary. This was where I felt Dad's presence strongest, where his voice seemed to echo in the grain of the wood. I'd found more than documents under that floorboard. I'd found letters he'd written to me, but never sent, thoughts about craftsmanship and life, pride in what we'd built together. One letter particularly stood out. Lena, if you're reading this, you're probably in the workshop, probably fighting to save what I've left behind. Know this: the house isn't the legacy. You are. Every skill I taught you, every moment we spent building together, every lesson about doing things right, that's what lives on. The house is just wood and stone. You're the keeper of something far more precious: the knowledge and values that make restoration possible. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was Harold, smiling broadly. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Victor Sloan was sentenced this morning. 3 years for forgery and fraud, plus restitution. He'll be paying back every penny of what he destroyed. I felt no satisfaction in his imprisonment, only relief that justice had been served. What about Travis and Haley? Community service. They have to work with habitat restoration projects. Basically, they'll be helping rebuild what others have torn down. The judge thought it was poetic justice. That evening, we held a dinner in the restored dining room. Mike and the crew, Harold, Mom, and me. Even Mrs. Patterson joined us. The room glowed with warmth from the restored fireplace. The original mantelpiece that Victor had nearly destroyed, now polished to perfection. Robert would have loved this, Mike said, raising his beer. Not just the restoration, but all of us here, continuing his work. Mom stood, surprising everyone. I need to say something. These past months, I lost myself. I let grief make me vulnerable. Let someone convince me that moving forward meant erasing the past. But Lena showed me the truth, that honoring someone's memory means preserving what they loved, not destroying it. She turned to me. Your father saw this coming. Somehow, he knew you were strong enough to fight for his legacy. But more than that, he knew you were skilled enough to rebuild it. That's the real gift he left you. Not just this house, but the ability to restore what others would abandon. Later, after everyone had gone, I sat in Dad's chair in the workshop. The house wasn't completely restored yet. There were still rooms to finish, details to perfect, but the bones were strong again, the heart of it beating with the rhythm of hammers and saws, just as Dad intended. I picked up his favorite chisel, the one his father had given him. Tomorrow, I'd start on the crown molding for the master bedroom. There was a tricky corner joint that would require patience and precision, exactly the kind of challenge Dad would have loved. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Then I saw the name Victor Sloan, probably sent just before they confiscated his phone at intake. "You won, but that house will be your prison, just like it was your father's." I deleted it without responding. Victor never understood. This house wasn't a prison. It was a testament. Every restored board, every preserved detail, every carefully maintained piece of history was a choice to honor rather than erase, to build rather than destroy, to remember rather than forget. I thought about Dad's words. Anyone can tear down and build new. It takes love to restore what others have given up on. The workshop was quiet except for the settling of old wood, the whisper of history in the walls. Somewhere in this room, in the tools and the knowledge and the memories, Dad's legacy lived on, not in the objects themselves, but in the continuation of the work. Tomorrow, there would be more restoration, more challenges, more opportunities to prove that some things are worth fighting for, worth preserving exactly as they are. Victor had tried to steal that legacy with lies and forged signatures. He'd failed because he'd underestimated both my father's foresight and my determination. But mostly, he'd failed because he never understood the true value of what he was trying to take. The house stood strong around me, wounded but healing, scarred but beautiful, just like those who truly loved it. Just like the legacy that no forgery could ever steal. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your experiences and reactions mean everything to us.